Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon GO discussion video. So, over the weekend we had Decidui Raid Day, and while I was raiding during this raid day, I had a couple of thoughts regarding the current state of Pokemon GO's raiding scene. I really do think that raiding in general has seen a drastic decline. Some of this is because of how players feel about Pokemon GO, while other reasons include Niantic nerfing the remote raid pass. I really do think there's a lot of things Niantic could do to improve raiding, and I really do hope they take up some of these suggestions. Now, this video is not meant to be incredibly negative towards Niantic or Pokemon GO. I want to be as constructive as possible and present a lot of solutions to make the raiding scene a lot more impressive than it was before. I really do feel like the decline in raiding is threefold. First and foremost, we have to talk about the nerf to remote raid passes. I've talked about this ad nauseum on my YouTube channel. I know it's something that's not very popular within the Pokemon GO community, but I really do think that if Niantic is choosing to double down on this remote raid pass nerf, then they need to do something to make up for it. Right now, remote raiding is probably one of the main ways people raid in Pokemon GO, even though it's incredibly expensive. And I really do think Niantic is completely out of touch with that specific aspect. Like, raiding in general is incredibly taxing when it comes to time and effort. And if you use remote raid passes, you cut a lot of that time and effort, and you're able to do a lot of raids even though you're not able to participate in person. I think this is a core aspect of raiding that Niantic has completely neglected. Yes, they want to make the game more about community and playing outdoors, but I think what they failed to realize is that a lot of players were still doing that even though they were remote raiding. Over the weekend, I met up with a couple of friends who quit Pokemon GO, and they were telling me how they miss raiding in Pokemon GO, and that's one of the aspects that they really enjoyed. And of course, these friends are people who played mostly during the pandemic when we had remote raid passes and a lot of important things. I really do think their feedback is important. Like, one of the things that they mentioned is how much they raided with remote raid passes, but they would meet up on the weekends to raid in person, and that was kind of the experience of Pokemon GO for the longest time. I really do think this is something that Niantic should have tapped into, but rather than doing that, they instead nerfed remote raid passes. And of course, this was a huge blow to the Pokemon GO community. I really want Niantic to understand this. Remote raid passes have been a staple part of Pokemon GO ever since they were introduced. They were a solution to a lot of different problems that Pokemon GO is currently facing, and I also believe that when it comes to remote raid passes, they were something that did promote community, and Niantic failed to realize that. As I'm sure many of you are aware, I very much disagree with how Niantic handled remote raid passes over the past year, and I really do wish they kept them as they were. And I know a lot of you already know my opinions regarding remote raid passes. I've talked about this very same thing repeatedly on my YouTube channel, but I do think it bears repeating. Niantic needs to understand that remote raid passes did actually promote community, and it's something that was very special for Pokemon GO. Now, many of us are fully aware that the remote raid pass nerf is contributing to the decline in raiding, but I actually think there's other reasons that most of us probably are not aware of. First and foremost, I think the game is lacking some really good Pokemon to be in raid battles. We've had the same legendaries repeatedly for the past couple of years, and only a handful of them are actually useful in some way. Off the top of my head, I can only think of maybe 4 or 5 that are actually useful that we've had in the last couple of months. And I think that is a huge problem. One thing Niantic should consider doing is having some more meta-relevant Pokemon in raids, and they could easily do this by adding some very powerful moves to mediocre legendaries and mythicals. Take for example, recently with Tarian form Landorus being reintroduced into raid battles, we also got its signature move, which is a very powerful ground type attack. And with this attack, it suddenly became one of the top tier ground type raid attackers. So a lot of people actually cared about catching a bunch of Tarian form Landorus. This is what I'm talking about. I feel like if they're going to be reintroducing a bunch of legendaries, they need to do something with the move pool so that they stay relevant. Now, I know a lot of players are going to be frustrated with the idea, of having to re-catch a bunch of Pokemon that they've already caught in the past. But if you think about it, raiding is all about how relevant certain Pokemon are. If the Pokemon is not going to be used in many aspects of Pokemon Go, then people are only going to raid one of them for the Pokedex entry and completely forget about them. So it's going to cause a drastic decline in the Pokemon Go raiding scene. But if the Pokemon is relevant and it's something that will progress the player in terms of player power, then those players are going to raid it hardcore. I think this is something Niantic should tap into, and it's very easy for them. All they simply have to do is consider adding very powerful moves to very mediocre legendaries and mythicals. Now the third reason is something that I don't think Niantic could do anything about, but it is something that they could work around. And that is the fact that when it comes to how players play Pokemon Go, it is very different from how it was several years ago. Back when raiding was first introduced, there was a lot of aspects of community-based play and a lot of coordination within communities. Every raid day there was something called Wafu raiding, where players would jump into a car or they would walk certain routes in order to complete as many raids as they can within a short period of time. But that sort of gameplay is not something that the modern Pokemon Go community really cares about. It feels like the average Pokemon Go player is a lot more casual than years past. And I feel like this is something Niantic needs to understand. When it comes to Pokemon Go's raiding, there is a lot of road bumps and hoops that players have to jump through, mainly because raiding is trying to be what it was back in the day, catering to hardcore players. And I feel like Niantic doesn't understand that players just simply do not want to play like how we played back in the day. I firmly believe this is the reason why remote raid passes were so popular when they were first introduced, mainly because players did not like all the hoops for doing one single raid. You have to coordinate with players around you, you need to communicate, you need to set times and places, and I feel like that sort of gameplay is completely outdated. Yes, Niantic does have a vision for communities to play together, but there's so many ways that players can do that without having to jump through so many hoops. So if Niantic is going to keep the remote raid pass nerf, then what they need to do is make the current raiding landscape a lot easier for players to do in person. There are so many suggestions within the Pokemon Go community for how Niantic could do this. First and foremost, I think they are very much underutilizing Niantic Campfire. I like the idea of you doing a lot of things that will alert players around you that you want to join up in a raid. And I feel like they could do stuff like that with Niantic Campfire, but they just really haven't done that right now. The integration of Niantic Campfire has been very lackluster, and there really is not that much connection between Pokemon Go and this separate app. I think they need to do something where you have Niantic Campfire as part of Pokemon Go. I think that will be a huge plus for getting people to be able to communicate with each other rather than having a completely different app, because a majority of players will just simply not use that, and a lot of people will argue that they already have apps like Discord and Facebook, so there really is no need for something like Campfire. I really think there's a lot of things Niantic could do rather than just restricting players in order to improve the raiding experience while maintaining that sense of community. I think there's a lot of potential for exactly what Niantic wants with Pokemon Go. I just feel like their methods of getting that is not necessarily something that is working right now. So if Niantic wants to see an increase in raiding activity, I really do hope they consider the things that I talked about, because yeah, raiding has drastically declined. When it comes to the 3 Hisuian starters, the raid days for each individual one have seen less and less people over time. Granted, Hisuian Decidueye raid day happened on a day where a majority of American players were watching the Super Bowl. I feel like Niantic could do a lot more to get players excited about raiding once again. Speaking of which, I thought that was a huge oversight. Like, why would they have a raid day on the same day as the Super Bowl? They're just completely making it difficult for a lot of players, or they're just causing a lot of players to just ignore their events. They need to have more oversight. They need to make sure they're planning ahead, because that was a very poorly made decision in my opinion. And I really hope they tap into the community feedback, because aside from all the toxicity, I think the community is very constructive. There's a lot of people on the Silph Road Reddit who make great suggestions. I mean, if you filter through all the toxic crud, like, they can come up with some really cool stuff. But yeah, that's just my own personal opinion. I really do hope this is something we can continue to discuss, because raiding is such a fun aspect of Pokemon Go, but in its current state, it's an absolute nightmare, and I really do hope Niantic makes some proper fixes. But yeah, with that said, that's going to be it for this video. Now, I would love to know your thoughts regarding Pokemon Go rating down below. Is this something that you would like to see improved in 2024, or do you feel like the game has moved on from this aspect of the game? Let me know those thoughts down below, and let's have a great discussion. And thank you so much for making it to this point in the video. If you ended up enjoying it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And also don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to take a moment and give a shout out to all my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Count Jinsula YouTube channel, then go and check out my Patreon, because every single patron does get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to raid with me in Pokemon Go, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. Also, if you want to support my channel in a different way, you could always do so by following me on social media. My handle is @CountJinsula, and I'm on the platforms that you see on screen. And yeah, with that said, that's going to be it. I'm Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.